I just want to say thank you guys so much for contributing to this fandom. You guys are all amazing, but especially Josh.
That's true.
Breathtaking palettes throughout More Than Meets the Eye just was part of what drew me into my first American comic, actually. My question is, I'm not an artist myself, but one of my closest friends is, and I've spent a lot of time screen sharing with her, watching her process, and it's fascinating. But oftentimes I hear, perspective, or color palettes. What for you is the most difficult part of the process?
I think, yeah, the color palettes and all that stuff is hard. But like starting off More Than Meets the Eye, a lot of people will comment on like the color palette and like it's got a specific look. And if I'm honest, like I never really set out to do that specific look for it. I was just every project that I take on, I try to like kind of change up my process a little bit just to keep things interesting. So I'm not coloring everything the same every single time for years on end. And just one of the ways that I changed it is kind of what gave More Than Meets the Eye that look. And so it was never really intentional, but I'm glad that it became a thing, you know, because yeah, it kind of became the visual identity for that book for that first season, which is really cool. Nothing I really set out to do, but it is really hard, and I try to be conscious of it more and more and try to push myself as a color artist or whatever in making sure that you kind of explore other options as far as colors go. You know, like not everything has to be just straight, well, Optimus is red and blue and that's kind of how he is and you pick the same red and blue all the time, but you can change and alter the way that people feel and you know, kind of take in a page just by maybe altering, you know, if you make the reds on Optimus a little more magenta and the blues a little more purpley, it kind of gives, it just kind of shifts the whole scene a little bit. And so that's something I'm trying to be a little more conscious of. And it's hard to do that because a lot of it, you know, like you have to be so precise and a lot of it has to be right, otherwise it feels wrong. And so it is hard, and I don't think I successfully did that a lot, even on More Than Meets the Eye, and even on the new stuff I'm working on now, like with Sins of the Wreckers, I'm trying to limit my color palette and to be really specific with my color palette, and it can be hard. Like just doing this first issue, like there's a lot of different scenes and locations, and I try to differentiate a lot of them with different color schemes or something like that. And getting towards the end of the book, I was like, did I already do like a purple place? I feel like I already did, but maybe if I throw in a little blue, maybe it changes it enough. And it gets kind of hard, but that's what part of makes it fun though too.
In terms of, not colors of course, but in terms of perspective, it is, perspective can be hard. But there are tons of books. There's like, you know, one of the books I started using was like the DC Guide to drawing comics, the DC Guide to inking comics. Like a lot of the DC Guide to anything comics really helps. And a lot of animation techniques also work too, like especially when you're doing like a layout, they have like this giant spread that they'll set everything up on, and you have one specific perspective like layout that they'll use. And there are a ton of like, and what I found over the years of actually discovering Tumblr was that there's a ton of reference sites that you can check out now. Like there's Art and Sturf, as I put it, artandsurf.com.tumblr or whatever. And it's a really good place to look for new perspective techniques that they're establishing. And it's like, and the one thing it's like learning these techniques are changing all the time, especially with the coming of digital media. And so, yeah, like perspective gets really crazy, especially when you're dealing with robots, because you're dealing with all those hard angles, wings everywhere. But yeah, like perspective is sometimes very challenging, but like really also there needs to be a point where you kind of just set it up, walk away, it's done. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah, I think perspective is probably part of my most challenging thing, but what I find is when I'm doing my rough layouts of a cover or a page, you know, you're doing this stuff in a grand scale, and you know, you're kind of roughly sketching it in. You're like, wow, all right, that looks pretty cool there. Let's make the, okay, put this over here. Okay, that lines up, that looks good. All right, okay, this is looking good. I'm going to start penciling it in. And then as you start penciling it in, you're like, wait a second, that's not quite right. Yeah. So that transition, sometimes the perspective gets wonkier as you start to fill in the details, and, you know, other things like that. So that's probably my biggest challenge, is just kind of transitioning. And you lose a lot of energy, too, with these robots, because my style is very, like, I don't know, I use the straight edge a lot, I guess. But, you know, I try to get a lot of detail and a lot of accuracy in the bots. And, yeah, as you start to fill all those details in, you lose a lot of the energy that you created in your rough sketch.
Yeah.
So that transition, I'd say, is the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, I'd say it's along the same lines for me. I think locking down like the basic form is often the toughest for me, and it's something I'm trying to get better at. Is like start drawing a character in a certain pose, and maybe it's an action pose. It's a little bit difficult, and you start roughing it in, and then you're like, well, that's close. That's pretty good. I'll just start actually rendering it, and then I'll get halfway through the rendering, and it's like this doesn't work at all. There's no energy in it. It's wrong. I'm trying to spend a lot more time just making sure the base pose, the way that the circles and little cubes that represent what the character's going to look like are lined up exactly the way I want them before I start in on the harder stuff. And so that's a constant challenge for me is doing that. For perspective, the one thing I would throw in is that there are lots of great tools that let you cheat, and I recommend you use them. Manga Studio has perspective rulers that you can set up. You can set up your 3-point perspective, tell it, you know, exactly how you want it to be, and then you can make it so that every line you draw snaps to that. It's beautiful. If you want to draw a cityscape in about, 15 minutes, buildings, they're all in perspective.
And it's a lot cheaper than Photoshop.
Yes, yeah, it's like $50 or something.
Yeah.
And then another thing that I use a lot is SketchUp, which is a 3D program. It's free, at least in its like basic version. And it's a really simple to learn and simple to use 3D program that lets you put together, like I have a full model of Swerve's bar in 3D. And so whenever I have to set a scene in Swerve's bar, I go into SketchUp, choose my camera angle, take a screenshot of that basically and drop it into the pencils, and now I have a background. I cheat.
Cheat to win, baby.
Sure.